There we go. This workshop talk will be presented by Crista DeLuzio, if I'm pronouncing that right, who is an associate professor of history at Southern Methodist University, where she also serves as the director of graduate studies and is recognized as an Al Schuler Distinguished Teaching Professor. She has earned her MA and PhD from Brown University and holds her BS and BA from Boston University. Dr. Peter Kupfer is our second panelist. He's an associate professor of musicology and chair of the Department of Musicology at Southern Methodist University's Meadows School of the Arts. He earned his PhD in music history and theory from the University of Chicago, focusing his dissertation on Soviet musical comedy films. Dr. Kupfer is a two-time Fulbright Fellow, recipient, and conducting research in Russia on the reception of Wagner and German Democratic Republic. And lastly, but not last, obviously, is Dr. Bruce Levy. He's a senior lecturer in the Department of English at SMU. He earned his PhD in American Studies from Brown University and specializes in late 19th and early 20th century American culture. At SMU, Dr. Levy coordinates Writer 1313, Introduction to Critical Reasoning, and teaches various courses, including literature, minorities, topics in American literature in the age of revolutions, and writing and critical reasoning. And we welcome them to the stage.
Push the button here. Okay, good morning, everybody. Thank you for being here at this very busy time of the year. So we are going to proceed. I'm going to go first, and then Crista will go second, and Bruce will go third. And we're proceeding basically, I would say, from more circumscribed or more constrained writing assignments to something more free. And that has to do with the nature of the courses that these prompts are for. So I'm going to get started here. And by the way, we have copies of all the materials we're going to show up here, not just the slides, but the actual documents that are posted in the slides. So I'll just kind of stall here for 1 second. If anybody wants to take a picture of that and open that folder. All right. So the assignment I'm going to talk about today is the final assessment prompt for my version of the critical reasoning course, which is MUHI 1313, Introduction to Critical Music Studies. And this is the prompt, which, as you can see, has lots of parts to it. Now, this, as I said, my portion of this is about a more circumscribed prompt. That's because this is a critical reasoning course, which is foundations in the common curriculum. And so we have to fulfill a very specific set of skills for that rubric. And so this prompt is based on the rubric. And as you can see, it's also very closely based on the two texts that we use, which are Craft of Research and They Say, I Say. And so we try to develop these skills over the course of the semester and then ask the students to demonstrate these skills through this final argumentative essay. So let me just show you, this is the rubric for critical reasoning. Students will demonstrate university level critical reasoning proficiencies through written expression. And there are the 4 supporting skills and then the content criteria. So any of you who have looked at this, I see people in the room who have taught this class, so they're quite familiar with this rubric. There's quite a bit in here that has to be achieved over the course of a semester to teach students critical reasoning. It's not just the critical reasoning, it's finding sources, vetting sources, integrating sources, writing it all up, creating an argument, creating an annotated bibliography, a certain number of words that have to be assigned, so on and so forth. And so what I have here in this next slide, these are sort of the key elements from the rubric that tie back to this final prompt. And hopefully you can see that students will state clearly and describe comprehensively an issue or problem to be critically considered. Well, that they have to do that through the strong argument, but also particularly through an introduction, the third bullet point there. So each of these bullets in the prompt for the final essay is drawn more or less directly from one of the supporting skills or content criteria. Now, I don't just say at the beginning of the semester, okay, you're going to do this, right? That would be pretty difficult because there's so many different skills that have to coalesce in this final argumentative essay. And so what I have here is just a screenshot from some of my assignments in Canvas. There are a total of 19 assignments, which sounds like a lot, but some of them are very simple and very short and are ask the students to just write a few sentences, drawing from a task from crafted research, or they say, I say. And in fact, we begin not with the students writing their own argumentative essays, but we analyze an existing article by a guy named Stanfill, and they analyze and look for all these elements in that article, and then show that they can recognize these elements before they try to create them themselves. So it really isn't until the second half of the semester that they begin to write their own final argumentative essay. And so here are the second half of the semester. You see that assignment 11, they write their own research questions. And this is after they have already analyzed somebody else's research questions. And so let me just show you, I'm not going to show you every one of these assignments along the way. That would be a little overkill. But here's my assignment 11, writing your own research questions. So drawing on the skills developed in assignment 3, that's the one where they've analyzed somebody else's research questions. They do these 3 things. And this is more or less, you can see I just assigned a few points here and there. It's kind of a completion grade. So it's more low stakes than writing a full essay. And I draw very clearly on the examples from crafted research. They're basically answering questions from the book. I actually put this into ChatGPT during Janice's presentation, and it just asked me to reformat it to be clearer. So to use bullet points a little bit more. But I think because it's drawing so clearly from a specific text, it didn't have many more suggestions than that. But you can see, again, starting simpler, this whole thing is just a massive scaffold, and this is the very simple basis of that. Here is assignment 15, kind of randomly chosen from among these scaffolded assignments. But this one is a little bit more complex. There's 2 parts to this one. Again, they are taking the outline of an introduction, which they've done in a previous assignment, and they're now writing it out into a full-fledged introduction. Again, with very specific instructions based on the instructions in crafted research. They have to add some quotations based on they say, I say. Then they have to write an outline of one of their reasons sections, or the first section of the paper, again, with specific tasks drawn from crafted research. And I give them even the bottom kind of a little outline of what their outline should look like. So they really can just fill in the blanks almost, as it were. The idea is that starts simpler, but builds this scaffold into, it's really not, radically innovative assignment. It's just a massive scaffold that builds up over the course of the semester. Oops. So I'm going to leave it there, pass it on to Crista, and she can talk to us about her writing assignment. And then after Bruce is done, we have some discussion questions that we'll sort of chat with each other about, and then we can open it up to questions.
How do I get?
Oh, just push this.
There's
Right
only one
arrow.
slide.
There
Okay,
you
the one slide. Okay, great. All right. Hi, everybody. Thanks for coming. I actually made handouts of the assignment that I'm going to talk about. I don't know if I made enough, but let's see. So there's 2 different ones. You can pass those around. Thank you. Thank you. And then they're also, you can access them through the QR code as well. So I'm talking about this assignment that I use in my 1000 level history class called Votes for Women, a History of the Women's Suffrage Movement in the United States. And I designed the class, started to think about it in like 2018, 2019 in anticipation of the 100th anniversary of the ratification of the 19th Amendment in 2020. And I had all kinds of plans for all of my assignments and to, connect what my students were doing in the classroom with what was going on in the outside world in terms of the celebration of the suffrage centennial, and then everything got shut down because of the pandemic, which was too bad. But it was a really good class, and I really loved designing it and teaching it, and the students seemed to like it, so I continue to teach it because it's also an avenue into, of course, American political history and civic history and women's history and all of those good things. So this is one of the assignments that lasts over the course of the semester, so I thought that I would talk about it as one example of scaffolding an assignment, which obviously the assignments that Peter talked about, same kind of thing, although it's a little bit different from other kinds of scaffolding that I do in other classes. So for example, when I teach the History Junior Seminar, which is our big research seminar for our students, and they have to produce a 25-page research paper at the end. There, that assignment is sort of more conventionally scaffolded, right? So it's broken down into all the tiny pieces over the course of the semester. They have to come up with a topic, they have to come up with a bibliography, then they have to do an annotated bibliography, then they have to hand in some analyses of primary sources, then they hand in their introduction, then the first 5 pages, et cetera, right? This assignment is a little bit different in the sense that they are doing multiple assignments or coming at the same kind of content from a variety of different ways over the course of the semester, all the way up to the end of the semester. So they're engaging with kind of the same set of content, and then they have to figure out different ways to process it, to understand it, and then also to produce something related to it and to communicate it and share it to me and to the other students in the class. So it has these several different components that are listed up there, right? So the first is this conventional essay piece, right? Where they have, so everybody has to pick a person who has some relationship to the suffrage movement, and they're going to write a biography essay about this person and that person's relationship to the suffrage movement. And that assignment begins very first week of the semester. So one of the things that we do in the first week is we watch a PBS documentary called The Vote. I highly recommend it if you're interested in this history. The 4-hour documentary on the history of the suffrage movement from 1900 to 1920. The course actually goes back to the 18th century up to 1920, but nonetheless, this provides them with a really good overview. And one of their first assignments, they watch the documentary out of class, and then they're expected to come to class with a list of 5 people that they learned about in the documentary. They're of interest to them, what interested them about these 5 people, and what else do they want to know about them. I will say students know virtually nothing about anybody who was involved in the women's suffrage movement. Maybe they've heard of Susan B. Anthony if we're lucky. Maybe they've heard of Elizabeth Cady Stanton. But of course, there's this whole really interesting cast of characters over this more than 100-year history that is certainly worth investigating. So that's one avenue into beginning to think about choosing their biographical subject. It also enables me, this assignment, assigning it early on, talking about it early on, enables me to encourage them to take a look at the class reading. So I say, okay, how are you going to choose the subject you're going to write about? Go to the historical monographs that we're reading all through the semester, look at the table of contents, look at the index, start to thumb through them, start to identify some names that might be of interest to you. So that's another way that they can choose the subject. And then I also provide them with a selected bibliography. You can see at the end of this assignment, there was a bibliography there of lots of biographies written about people involved in the suffrage movement. And so I tell them, start to do a little preliminary research, see what who interests you and what you might want to work on there. And so once they've made their selection, then their first production here is this 5-page essay where they have to write about this person's relationship to the suffrage movement, not to recount the story of the person's life. It's not a book report, right? I tell them it's to come up with an argument that you can make that's original to you. Many of the people who were involved in the suffrage movement, of course, for them, suffrage was their main cause of their whole life. But for some of them, it was only a secondary core. They were involved in all kinds of other forms of activism. The suffrage story was only a piece of their larger life story. The ways in which the suffrage story is related to certain aspects in their personal life and other aspects of their life is what should be of interest to them in writing the paper. So that's one thing that they do. Then the second component of this essay is this primary source recording assignment. And this was actually, the original intent of this was when I was designing the class, I knew that the DeLuzio Library was going to be doing some public programming related to the suffrage centennial. So I met with the librarians and we talked about how what my students were doing in our class might contribute to that. So one idea was that they would select a primary source that was produced by their biographical subject, so the person that they're reading this biography about, and that they would record a presentation or performance of this primary source, and then those would be uploaded right to the DeLuzio Library's website with a little bit of an introduction, and then be accessible right to the wider public. So that idea was initially related to the celebration of the suffrage centennial, but I have continued to assign this component of this particular assignment. And there's several pedagogical reasons for this. One is that it involves another kind of research. So for the biography essay, they have to find a scholarly biography on the person. For this now, they're reading about the person, and the historians in the book that they're reading, of course, are using primary sources to tell the story of this person's life and make arguments about the person's life. And so now they have to start to find what might be of interest to them, a particular source that was produced by this person. And then they have to go and find it, see if they can find it someplace, right? So they have a letter in mind or a speech that a person gave in mind, and they want to go and see if they can find the whole thing and if that would be a viable source to use for this particular assignment. Many of these sources are published, so some of them are very easily accessible. A lot of them, of course, are digitized, but some of them are not necessarily easily accessible. And so the students have to do some digging and figure out, how do I get access to an archive? If there's a source in an archive that is not digitized or not published, how might I go about requesting a photocopy of this particular source? They also, of course, have to, there's a lot of discernment involved here, right? Because the idea here is that they're going to select one source that encapsulates something about this person that they're making an argument about in the biography essay and also in the oral presentation, which is the last component of this assignment. And so it has to be particularly emblematic of an idea or an initiative or something telling about this particular person's life. And the other reason why I assign this is because I think that it enables students to engage with the material, primary source material, in a different kind of way than if they're just reading about it and writing about it. So they have to perform it. And I do give them a couple of examples. So there's a couple of really good recordings of speeches given by Frances Ellen Watkins Harper, an African-American woman, civil rights activist and suffrage activist, and Sojourner Truth, the famous Sojourner Truth. So they have exposure to what I'm looking for, right? We watch these recordings in class, and so they know what they're expected to do. But it really requires them, when you have to perform, a piece of writing, when we're reading something, right, our students and even myself, they come across a word they don't understand while they're reading, they might just skip over the word, right? But if you actually have to speak the word, you have to know what it means. They have to decide where to place emphasis when they're speaking, what kind of inflection, right? So it really enables them to kind of inhabit the material in a different kind of way. So they record the primary source reading, they submit it to Canvas, and then I have them organized for the final step in all of this is the oral presentation, step number 3 there. So they're going to give an oral presentation to a small group of students in the class. I usually have 30 students in this class, so it's too many to do inside of the regular schedule, right? So I organize them into groups of 5. They have to sign up to come on a Friday where they're going to present their biographical subject to the smaller group of students. And one of the things that they're required to do in the oral presentation, basically they're giving the argument that they made about this person's relationship to the suffrage movement, what they said in their biography essay, but they have to come at it a different way now. They have to present it orally. They have to come up with images, write a slide presentation that's going to accompany that. And then one of the pieces of the presentation has to be a discussion of the primary source. So the other students in their group will have heard the primary source or watched the primary source recording. That's one of the assignments before they come to their group meeting on the Friday. And now the student who's doing the presenting has to make a case. Why did I choose this source? Why is it particularly emblematic of what I want you most to know about this person's contribution to the suffrage movement? So all of these things now are getting integrated, right, over time. And by now we're in April. I always teach this class in the spring. So we're at the end of the semester. And the very final thing actually that they have to do is, because this class counts for the human diversity requirement in the common curriculum, then we circle back to it all one more time on the final exam. And so that's the other handout that you have here, where now they have to think about their biographical subject and all that they've learned about them through reading the biography and doing the research and doing the primary source recording in relation to some of the larger themes of the class. So if you look at, for example, question number 1, what does the life of your biographical subject reveal about the ways in which gender is socially constructed within particular historical context? So again, they might not have directly addressed that in so many words in the biography essay or even in the oral presentation. So now they have to think through the material in a different kind of way in order to marshal that material to answer that particular question. And of course, the theme of gender as a social construction has been a theme all across the course, and the ways in which the suffragists thought about gender as being socially constructed or not, right? And all of these discussions and debates about gender and how that related to advocacy on behalf of the suffrage cause. So that's this assignment, all of the different pieces, lots of balls in the air. I know one of the things that Bruce and Peter and I talked about, and I've thought a lot about, is this kind of overload, right? I mean, it's a lot of details, right? So they get this at the start, we go over it, the big kind of overview at the beginning of the semester, and then because they're working on it all semester, I circle back to the individual pieces. But there's a lot of signing up they have to do, right? Everybody has to pick a different biographical subject. So it's first come, first serve with that, right? So there's a lot of different steps that are involved, a lot of organization on their part, a lot of organization on my part. But by the end of the semester, they seem to really enjoy it. Students really do enjoy learning about other people's lives. It's a really good way into history. And I think coming back at it through all these different avenues and also different kinds of productions can be satisfying by the time we get to the end of the semester. So that's it. Thanks.
How do I get to my,
So you want, what do you want to do? Want to show your file?
yeah,
Oh, then you have to go into the box folder.
okay.
It's not in the PowerPoint, it's just in the folder.
In the
box
same folder?
In the same folder.
Yes.
As almost the beginning of the. Yeah, that,
Which one is it?
that slide.
This one?
No, that one. If you hopefully just click that. No.
And which one is it?
We'll start with one.
This one?
Yeah.
Do you just want to click on them?
Yeah. You can click on it. Okay, great. Thank you. Hi, so I wanted to talk about what I do specifically in a writer class. This is Writer 2305, which is part of the honors program. And I call this assignment prompt engineering, which is a term that I lifted from the world of AI. AI looms, I don't have to tell you, AI looms large over all of writing these days. And it's changing the nature, I think, of what writing at the university is going to be like. These days, because I teach writing a lot, I feel in some ways like a medieval scribe who has caught wind of some fellow named Gutenberg who is going to put us all out of work. So I think it's really important that we prepare for that in ways that any way that we can. And again, so I've lifted this term prompt engineering. So this isn't what I do isn't exactly what, of course, the AI world does, but it seems to me that it's increasingly important these days to cultivate in students an ability to ask the right questions, ask good questions. And it seems to me when we give them the prompt, when we give them the prompt that we want them to write about, we're actually missing a pedagogical opportunity. It seems to me that I always tell my students that, you know, life doesn't give you prompts. You have to come up with your own prompts, right? So it seems to me that we're really missing an important, we're taking away from our students an important opportunity for them to cultivate a skill that's going to be increasingly important to them in the workplace and at the university itself. And that is to say, to pose questions that they want to write about. So in theory, in any case, this assignment, and we'll go through the scaffold, gives them a sense, in theory, again, of ownership of the assignment, which I think is really important because students often are very, you know, passive, and we promote that passivity, it seems to me, when we give them what they should be doing on their own, collectively in the classroom or individually. So again, I think it's important to give them a sense of ownership of the assignment and engage with them at the outset of the assignment. And in theory, it also will give them a greater sense of engagement and, you know, sort of, I mean, there's something very artificial, it seems to me, about giving them the prompt. And I would, you know, giving them the assignment that, and having them sort of, keeping them outside of that process. So I want to engage them in the process. And I should say that I don't do this for every assignment, and I don't do this in every class, but it seems to me it's worthwhile. It's worthwhile to spend a class or two on something like this. And I found it to be pretty effective, and it provides some, you know, good classroom conversation also. So how I begin was, this is, what I have here is, this is the second paper of the semester. So the first paper of the semester, I gave them the prompt because I wanted to give them a model that they could look at and maybe emulate for the second assignment. So I have them, I give them a task. I think, you know, a very specific task that, using the prompt from Essay 1 as a guide, draft a prompt for Paper 2 that asks the writer to apply Freud or Marx to an analysis of either Bartleby the Scrivener or Rose for Emily. So in Honors Writer, we teach some of these foundational texts. that provide a kind of analytical framework for the reading of literature, right? So we've read Freud, we've read Marx, and they have a choice to write either to frame a question about Bartleby or Melville's story Bartleby or Faulkner's story A Rose for Emily. Then I give them a little sense of what a good prompt looks like, or what a prompt should do, and I engage them in conversation about this. And I'm sure, I mean, I've written some real stinkers over the years. I'm sure maybe a lot of us have had this experience where, you've come up with a prompt, you think it's great. You start reading the papers and you're going, oh my God, right? What have I done? Maybe I've put in some key phrases that they're constantly repeating and, or whatever, and it doesn't work. So in some ways, this is a way of putting the responsibility on the students rather than on me. But more seriously, I do want to help them to delineate what makes a good prompt. And one of the things we do as we go through the sample prompts, which I'll get to in a second, I have them, think about, would you want to write a paper on this prompt? Would you want to write, is this prompt doable? The students submit their prompts, and I'll get to that in a second, as I say. So I give them, I give them a little sense of what a prompt should look like, might look like, and I write different kinds of prompts at different times. But one of the things I like to, sometimes my prompts are very short, sometimes they're longer. I like to provide background information and get them to write background information leading up to the actual prompt, which as I explained to them, is when they're doing this, they're actually writing the paper. They're starting to write the paper. They could cut and paste some of this background information that they've been working on in framing the prompt. It's a good way of having them review the material and engage with the material from the get-go. I do find this is very helpful in sort of intensifying the student engagement with the material that they've read. They really, in order to frame a good prompt, you really have to have a pretty good sense of the material. So it's more demand. It puts more demands on them as writers and readers, which I think is a good thing. Okay, so I give them the sample prompt, the prompt they used for the first paper, which is on the story, The Marquise of O. And so that's, so they have a sample, they have a model that they can emulate in their own prompt writing. And some of them do a very good job and some of them not so much. But okay, so how do I get to next one? That is 2.
Just click the back button.
Yeah, okay, thank you. Okay, so they submit, these are the prompts that they submit. So I put together a Word file of the prompts that have been submitted to me, and then they comment on the prompts, right? So we spend a class period going over a bunch of prompts and that they have submitted themselves, and then they comment on in class, they do it in class, and then they do it, they submit it on Canvas as well, where they evaluate the prompt. So one of the things we're doing is, as we're doing this, we're trying to get a sense of maybe the 4 or 5 things that really a prompt needs to do. So we have them engaged in the classroom discussion about that. So here's a prompt about A Rose for actually, this was a person writing about both stories, right? Which is probably too much to write about. But so here in the yellow here, or the orangey yellow, these are the student comments on the prompt. So this prompt has a clear ask to the writer. I like an ask, making quote selection, analysis, detailed and specific to answer the prompt. So that actually is one of the categories that we might be thinking about. One of the the 4 or 5 aspects of the prompt that we should be looking for. So there's evaluation of the prompts, right? So this one is on marks. One of the things I tell them also, which I think is important, a lot of us do this, is by selecting some sample quotations from Marx or Freud or from the stories themselves, they already have the material that they're going to be using in the paper. I don't know, I've had this, I tell them about my experiences as an undergraduate writer, where I would come up with an idea, I'd have a thesis, and then I have to start searching for the evidence, which is maddening. You know, I remember leafing through books going, okay, well, I have, you know, I have an assertion here, now I got to find something that supports my assertion. And sometimes I can't find them. So I tell them that the way to avoid that is you build your paper from the inside out rather from the outside in, and you actually come up with, you have the quotations you want to use from the get-go, and you build out from there, so you don't have to go on a wild goose hunt looking for evidence to support your assertions. Okay, so here these are samples. This is from this all comes from one student who is here. I think the task of the writer could be clearer, et cetera, et cetera. So there, you know, so we would go through this in class, look at this in class, and decide what collectively which prompt might work best for us, right? And then let's see. I'm sorry. Where do we go from here? Peter, how do I get to the next one? Okay, so in our class, we decided that three. Okay, so this is the one we decided on. The class decided on this paper on Bartleby, and they provide here some background information, as I suggested, et cetera, et cetera. And this is one of the students' comments here. I think this is a well-written prompt, et cetera, et cetera. The passages are that they're going to analyze from Marx, from Bartleby. They're going to juxtapose those two texts, and one illuminates the other, et cetera, et cetera. So they're, in a sense, you know, setting up the writing process as they're coming up with the prompt, which again, I think is a very efficient way for them to start the writing process. And finally, let's see, and then we came up with, and this is the actual prompt that we came up with, which again, it's the invisible hand, right? I mean, I take this I learned this from Crista. This is like John Locke's child rearing. I teach a course with Crista on adolescent and childhood and the history and literature of childhood and adolescence. And Crista taught me about John Locke's philosophy of child rearing, which is kind of like the invisible hand, right? It's like you let them. Okay, so they make the choices that you want them to make. Right. You give them the illusion of total freedom, and then you monitor them. Right. So that's sort of my philosophy in terms of this kind of project. So one of the things I'm a stickler for, actually, because I really think that you have to start from the get-go, and my students make fun of me because I'm a stickler for titles. I think titles are really important, actually. So a very clever student came up with this title for the project, "A Spectre is Haunting Wall Street." So Bartleby is a story of Wall Street. That's the subtitle of it, A Story of Wall Street. If you haven't read Bartleby the Scrivener, you must. It's a great story. And "A Spectre is Haunting Europe" is the opening line of the Communist Manifesto. So a very clever student came up, and Bartleby is described as an apparition, actually. And it's not even clear he's not a figment of the narrator's imagination. Okay, so I like that as the title, and we all, again, a student came up with this, and like the class was very excited by the cleverness of the title. Okay, and this becomes the background information that I culled from the students. I ended up writing this, but it was with a high level of student engagement. Right, so this is the background information that leads up to the prompt. Even has a quote in it that can be used in the paper, or parts of which can be used in the paper. And here's the prompt: analyze Bartleby the Scrivener through the lens of Marxist theories of capitalism and class alienation. Consider moments in the Communist Manifesto that emphasize the psychological and social costs of capitalist structures and apply these to Bartleby. So that's the prompt, and these are the things that they should consider. That gets more specific. Again, and as I say at the end here, these bullet points are meant to stimulate your thinking. Again, one of the things I think one of the challenges we face when we have these bullet points, sometimes they will respond to them point by point by point, and that becomes very boring to read, and it actually hampers their creativity, I think, in writing this. So I tried to emphasize to them, on one hand, you want to give them these points to stimulate their thinking, but on the other hand, you don't want them to respond to them. And, they've been trained to respond to these things in high school. One of the things where, anyone who teaches writing, I always feel that these days, I keep on saying that I have to spend more and more time each semester getting them to unlearn things that they've been trained to do in high school that won't work at the university level. And one of those things is they respond to these kind of bullet points, very task-oriented, et cetera, which isn't going to cut it at the university level. So I want to remind them that these bullet points are meant to stimulate their thinking, and they shouldn't respond to them point by point in that sense. And as I say, I mean, I've had mixed results with this, and I'm still refining it. I'm still trying to figure out how to make it work in the most successful way. But so I'm really interested in any input you might have, any ideas you might have about this. But in general, I find it a very useful exercise and a useful way of spending class time with them. And I would say that again, I think it's really, really important to get them engaged in this kind of process early on in their education, because this is really going to be the kind of thing that I think they're in the workplace, and even if they're using AI, you've got to learn to ask the right questions, right? And that's what prompt engineering is all about in the AI world. So that's what I have. Thank you. And I have handouts if anyone wants.
We have more time. I have a few questions I'd like to ask you guys, and then also the audience. The audience questions first. I would love to get those first.
Actually, can we go back to the QR code?
Yes, and as an announcement, we put, if you go to the Google Spring Kickoff program, you'll get the program, and in the program after each presentation, we put a link to all the materials. You can download the PowerPoint, and the PowerPoint and find that. In the meantime, are there any questions you'd like to pose to the or furthering?
We also had some discussion questions that we wanted to go over. Yeah, anything else? Do people still need the QR code? I can get out of the way here. Yeah.
So I really like in your presentation, you mentioned this, they say, I say, and I love that because we do argumentative papers too, and that's a really nice way of thinking. I'm not just saying what the other people are saying, but they're saying this, I have to think of something myself to add to the conversation.
Right.
That's the research part of it. So how do you explain to your students how they should think about research argumentative assignments if they're new to writing this type of assignment? Because I always run into that. I have to explain the whole process and intro development, thesis, argument, and it's like,
Well,
you have an easier shortcut, something that you can.
no, I mean, that's what the whole course does. I mean, we break it down element by element. The craft of research does that really well. They have a chapter on introductions and conclusions, chapter on on overview of arguments, and then the pieces of an argument, on sources and evidence and logic and reasoning. And so we really go, those assignments, the first half of the semester especially, each one focuses on a different element of making an argument. And so first, as I said, we analyze how somebody else does it so they can see it kind of in the real world. And then they have to attempt it themselves. And I should say, I used to, when I taught this last time, I let the students pick their own topics, which was a mistake, I think. And this semester, I'm going to give them a set of 3 to choose from. They're pretty broad still. And I'm going to give them each a starter source, is what I'm calling it, as opposed to just sort of setting them out in the wild. Yes, we work with the librarians. We practice using databases and finding sources. But unless they have something to start from, I found it was very difficult for them. So I give them a starter source, which is the they say that they then begin from, and then they can respond to it and build that whole argument over these many steps. The Craft of Research. The Craft of Research, University of Chicago Press. It's in the 5th edition now, I think, or 6th edition. I've been using it for a while now. It's quite, I like it. Go ahead.
This is actually kind of a question that's already up there, but I'm just curious what has backfired for you in terms of things being, resources maybe being inaccessible, and how they kind of help edge students before they start going down the long road of a scaffolding assignment that is not going to work.
I have 2 thoughts.
Okay, go ahead.
One thought is if they get behind, it's really hard to get back on track. So if they don't submit 1 or 2 or 3 of these assignments early on, then they're just playing catch up. I had some students submit, later assignments in the scaffold and not the previous ones, and they just missed the point. So keeping them on task is a challenge. That's why I try to start with simpler assignments and build them into bigger ones, and say, well, you already did this in assignment 3, so it's just a kind of version of that, but now with your own topic. The other thing that backfires, and this is our first discussion question here, and Chris already addressed this, which is sometimes the prompt is longer than the assignment, that they submit. And Bruce also mentioned this, with you give them bullet points of questions to think about, but then you have to add a note, and then add another note, and another note. And it was interesting when I put that one assignment into ChatGPT, what did it do? It turned it all into bullet points, because I guess that's easier for students who are kind of trained in this way of thinking. And I was thinking about my own prompt as Bruce was talking, that's kind of what I do. I say, here are 4 sentences. You need this, this, and this. But the goal is that as they, once they do it very kind of pedantically, then in the draft where they're writing out sort of full prose, I can add comments, say, okay, now we got to make this a little bit more organic. And it's not just this, then this, then this, then this. I say actually talks about that kind of summary that's just this, then this, then this, then this. It's extremely boring to read. But I've gone back and forth between the length of my prompts, how much detail to give them. It backfired last semester. I had a few students who I think they would read the title of the assignment and maybe the first sentence and then just submit something, which they thought they were supposed to do. And they didn't come anywhere close to, demonstrating those skills. So I'll step aside.
For this particular assignment, like for example, the primary source recording, they have to hand in a worksheet.
Turn the microphone.
Here, the microphone. Okay. Yeah, not projecting. Okay, right. So they have to hand in a worksheet where obviously they identify the source, and then they have to provide a rationale for why they chose it. Because of this assignment, that's where they can go the most awry, because some of them don't, even though I've talked a lot about what a primary source is, some of them still don't even understand what that might be or how they would go about finding it. Choosing the biography is easy because I give them a list. I mean, most of them draw from the list that I give them. So they don't really run awry with that. Although I did have to be, sometimes I'll be explicit as briefly as possible what I don't want them to do. So for example, for the biography, when I want to say maybe the first time I assigned it, some of them did just give me a regurgitation of this person was born here, lived here, did this. So I have to be very clear that this is not a report on the person's life, right? So you have to, and then there's a few, bullet points or questions about how you connect this person to the suffrage movement, which is a different kind of exercise than just regurgitating a life story of somebody. So sometimes I'll do that. I'll say, don't do this, right? Because that's not what I'm looking for.
Yeah, I would just say that, I think a lot of students freak out when they're given this kind of freedom. And they're so used, I mean, I think again, the kind of training they receive in high school, the standardized test taking, teaching, they're being taught to the test, et cetera, that when they're given this kind of freedom, responsibility, et cetera, to craft these questions for themselves, they kind of freak out a little bit. They're not used to this kind of level of engagement, it seems to me. So as I say, I mean, I think we really, you got to sort of like flip a switch with them, pretty early on, because, they've gotten, in particularly in all our students, the Hilltop students, the honor students, and all of our students, really, they've been trained a certain kind of way that really, as I say, doesn't really necessarily work at the university level, and the kind of level of deeper thinking and analysis that they're going to be facing. And so it really is almost a kind of psychological switch that has to go off for them. So they've gotten here because they're really good at doing what they've been told to do, but now they're given the responsibility to tell themselves what they have to do, and that's a little harder for them to deal with. So that's a problem that we try to address. Yeah. Yes.
I just don't, Mike, he's right there. I had a question for Bruce. Well, kind of two related things.
Mm-hmm.
One is, I'm curious if you've ever tried like where instead of picking one prompt for the whole class, if the students just like trade prompts and write each other's, or they write their own prompt. And second is, given that you're choosing, I'm just curious if there's some sort of grade reward or something for the student whose prompt was chosen, or like if you had the best prompt and we choose it, you don't have to write the essay or something like that.
Well, I think just the honor of having your prompt chosen is its own
Many of the
reward.
writers
I
agree.
don't want to be so transactional. I don't give out Starbucks gift cards or anything like that, but praise, and the admiration of their peers. What was your? Oh, yes. Yes, I have done that. And the problem with that is, just as, in any class, you have A students, B students, and C students, then you have people who are going to, the problems with the paper are embedded in the prompt itself that they write. So I have done that. I've had, and it can be more interesting to grade, if you're grading, if you have, in these classes, they're still small, 15, 16 students, it's nice to get some different papers, right? So yeah, I do that. That's more work for me, of course, because I have to sort of, deal with each prompt separately. But yeah, that can work. But again, there are some quality control issues that come up with that. But I have done that, and with, again, mixed results. But I always say, at the end of the day, with all whatever pedagogical innovations you come up with, the good students are going to write good papers, the mediocre students will write mediocre papers, and the bad students will write bad papers. And so that's just the way it goes, But I would say, I think I have more students writing better papers through this process.
Any other questions?
Maybe I don't need that.
Oh, here for the recording.
Oh, okay. Do you ever feel like the students just want to please you? I mean, sometimes they ask me like, how do you want me to write this? How do you want me to? And it's like, I just want you to write it correctly. I mean, and it's not like because I want it that way, but because I teach math. So, there's a correct way of writing things and there is an incorrect way of writing things. So have you encountered this, and how do I get them out of that process of thinking that the only thing that they need to do is please me? And that's their job and my job.
I would say one thing that's worked for me in that regard, I've never had a student, actually say something like that to me, but I get a sense that they're writing in a certain way. But that's why I like the buffer of having these books, because I say you're just answering the questions in the book, so you're pleasing the author, really. You're not pleasing me particularly. You're pleasing me if you do this task that's been laid out. So there's sort of this triangulation. It's not that they're directly answering my questions, it's my questions that I've gleaned from some other texts. So there's this kind of objective other they never use the author's names. It's like this floating weird thing out there, as opposed to me, the person they see every day. So they're not really pleasing a person, they're just doing a task. So that's worked for me. Hopefully they're pleasing themselves. Sounds weird.
Understand this, that makes sense to you, not to me, but to you.
That's the challenge, isn't it? To get them all to just start to love learning on their own.
I always tell my students that, that they're not writing for me, right? I say, we're playing a little game here. Of course, you're writing for me, but I tell them, I evaluate I always say, you're writing for an intelligent reader who hasn't necessarily read this material. So I tell them, I read your work as your editor, really, not, so it's not that you can't teach me anything, but I want to see how you're teaching someone else, right? And so it's not a question of pleasing me or telling me what I need. It's what do you think your audience needs, right? What do you think they need? And so I can't tell you what they need. You're going to have to figure that out. I'll help you, but so it's not a question of what I want from you. I mean, what I want is intelligence. I want engagement. I don't, I'm not going to tell you there's no answer necessarily, right? There's no right answer that I'm looking for. I'm just looking for an intelligent level of engagement. But yeah, you get a lot of that. But then on the other hand, you also sometimes get students who complain that, they just, if you don't tell them, if you don't give them, don't say what they want to hear, they'll give you a bad grade. So it's like, you can't win.
I have one more thought on that, which is this idea of audience is really important, because in both They Say, I Say, and Crafted Research, that's one of the first things they talk about is understand who you're writing for. And so I tell them at the very beginning in the prompts and in class that I'm not their audience. The other students in class are their audience. They're writing for each other. And because they're writing an argumentative essay, I say, you're going to try to write something that will convince your classmates to see something your way. And so that's what I always come back to. And that helps a little bit, especially when we do peer review. I like to pair people who have different views on the topic, and then they can really get into some discussions there. So I try to make it clear from the beginning that I'm more their editor, not their audience. They're trying to convince each other of something when they're making their argument.
Wonderful. This is a question for everybody, maybe starting with Crista. This is about AI and writing, and I know this is a scary topic, but I'm really curious because you guys are like the front line, the avant-garde when it comes to this. So how, let me see here, the question. How do you think AI could help with your courses and your papers? And I'm phrasing the question in a positive way because it's very easy to be like, oh, it's the worst, right? But I want us to think, could there be any ways in which AI would be helpful to you in promoting good writing and not detracting from it?
Looking at me and I don't know. So I'm going to stay for the other sessions and get an answer to this question. I mean, this is obviously topic of conversation in the hallways and at the proverbial water cooler and all over the place. And I don't feel like I'm in any way yet equipped to kind of figure this out. I'm just starting to think about it and, learn about it. So I don't know, either of you, any better? I mean, Bruce and I are team teaching this semester. And so this was the bulk of our conversation last week about how we're going to use it, if we're going to use it. What did we decide?
Oh, that was last week.
Yeah, we don't remember what we decided because it's probably changed since last week, right? Go ahead.
No, one of the things that I hate is when we're suspicious of our students, right? When we begin the process and we're immediately suspicious, and like when it becomes a kind of policing function. And so, I mean, that's awful. That's really, I hate that. So what I tell my students at this point is that, I kind of feel on some level, they know more about this than I do. They're using it a lot more than I am. And so I'm just saying, we're engaged in this process together. Let me know how you're using it. And you can't use it, you can't hand in as your paper something that's been produced by AI, but You can, you could use it for research. You could, you could do some use it for background information, et cetera, et cetera. But I'm really sort of, let's talk about this. Let me know how you're using it, because I'm pretty old school. I mean, a lot of us, right, these days, the return of the blue book, right? A lot of
Yes.
in-class writing, blue books. No, one thing we did decide is no electronic devices in the classroom, note-taking by hand, so we're going, we're going offline basically during class sessions. And it's, but again, it changes by the hour, so we'll see. And I would imagine in a couple of years, when it becomes even more sophisticated, stylistically sophisticated, it's going to be very difficult to know. And I think, I've thought maybe the college essay is going to go the way of I have in my office a 45, not a gun, a single, what we used to call singles, right? Ever see the, and I'm thinking, oh, the college essay might go the way of the 45. It's an older technology that might not, I mean, what's the university going to look like in 5 years? So I don't know what, so I have no answers. I just want to have a conversation with the students about it.
Well, one of the things that we did talk about, and I've been thinking a lot about, which is related to your question, which is to make the case as often as we can in as many ways we can about the pleasures of learning and the benefits of learning to them, right? So not to me. And I mean, one of the things that Bruce has pointed out to me when we team teach, because you don't always see what you're doing, when our class is history and literature, and I give, a lot of the lectures in the background and these kinds of things. But when they're reading historical monographs, one of the things that I want them to begin with, we sort of reverse engineer. So I'll say, why do you think this historian wrote this book? What were these questions that this historian had in mind, and why does it matter? And so to expose them to this idea that, first of all, the history is not facts that fall from the sky, but that this is why we all do what we do, for the pleasure of discovery, for asking good questions and meaningful questions, right? So why do these questions matter to you? And so in designing your prompts and writing your papers, all of that should always be in their mind. And I think that probably we need to be a little bit more explicit about what the whole scheme of education actually is all about, and why they're sitting in this room with us in this precious period of time in their life when they could be doing a lot of other things, right? So the process, as much as the product, is what's important. Those are my idealistic.
Well, we need to be idealistic in
Yes.
this world,
Oh,
right?
yes.
Not to harp on these books, but both They Say, I Say, and Craft of Research have in the new editions chapters on AI. And the They Say, I Say one, if I'm not mistaken, is quite positive in this way of, okay, how can we embrace this as a useful tool? Not don't do this, don't do this. Of course, they warn against, what it does badly. But I found AI is really good at formulaic things. So prompts, for example, and rubrics and that kind of stuff. So I've thought about having students use it when they write their own research questions, but then they have to pick one and then run with it, and then the other tasks that come after are not as easily done with AI. We also have open discussions about it. We have a whole class where we just talk about the advantages and disadvantages of it. Last semester, one student, and I never thought about this, one student said in high school he was told to use ChatGPT to proofread his own writing. So once he had finished the text, input it and then have it proofread it, which is something that I would consider perhaps doing. But then of course you have to verify that they've written the first thing in the first place. And then I wouldn't just have them submit the proofread one. I'd have them submit both and then write a reflection on what it improved and what they learned from that process. I have used AI in other classes where I tell the students, okay, you can use it to create a draft of an essay, and then you have to vet all the sources, edit the essay, make it sound like you. And then at the end, I say, okay, write a reflection. Did you like this process? Would you do it again? 95% say it's way more work than just writing it myself from the start. And when they have the option to do it a second time, almost none did it. So hopefully they're learning through this process what it can do well and what it can't do well.